welcome to the third session, which is on research methods. Every project you undertake, you need to do some form of research. This session is to help you understand those methods or concepts that underpin any research that you carry out. At the end of this session, we would like you to understand the philosophies, some of the philosophies that underpin research. We classify research into various forms. There's post-positivism, constructivism, advocacy, and pragmatism. So you have an idea about these things. And understand the different research approaches, quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods. Describe the different research methods, including experiments, survey, case studies, etc. Understand the different data collection methods, including sampling, secondary data documentation, observation, questionnaire, and interview. While positivists believe that the researcher and the research person are independent of each other, post-positivists accept that theories, background, knowledge, and values of the researcher can influence what is observed. They believe that the human knowledge is based not on unchangeable, rock-solid foundations, but rather upon human conjectures. The meaning of conception is to be sought in their practical bearings, that the function of thought is a guide to action, and that truth is preeminently to be tested by the practical consequences of belief. A reasonable and logical way of doing things or thinking about problems that is based on what? Dealing with specific situations instead of on ideas and theories. Constructivism is a philosophical viewpoint about the nature of knowledge and how humans make meaning in relation to interaction between their experiences. So, the research process can be viewed as sort of an onion, layers, one layer after the other. There's a choice of your research question. Right, then you decide which philosophical approach you are going to use. Then you determine which research approaches you would use. And then you then determine the research methods you will be using. So once you determine the research methods, then you have to decide on the time horizons, whether you are doing a cross-sectional or longitudinal study. And then, of course, you then determine the data collection methods. All right. So the research question is a global issue. The philosophy that is going to use, whether this is positivist, pragmatic, advocacy, or constructivist. And then the research approach you would apply, whether this is quantitative, mixed method, or qualitative. And then the research methods, whether you're going to do an experiment, a survey, a case study, actions research, grounded, and so on. So at the very bottom, at the very core, is a data collection method. So before you even come to how you are collecting the data, these are all questions you will need to answer. How do you go about your research design? So the objectives, why? The strategies would answer the question what. The tactics will answer the question when. If you take your recommended test, then the objectives as to research philosophy, the research question, are covered in chapters 2 and 3. The strategy is covered in chapter 3, and the tactics is covered in chapters 5 and 6. So the objectives which answer the question, research philosophy, research question, hypothesis, at the end of which you have your aim and objectives. The strategy, what's the research approach, research methods, data collection methods, and then, of course, when the project plan. So you need to, first of all, identify your research problem. So what is a research question? What problem are you trying to solve? not only must you identify the problem, but you must also define this problem and its boundaries. You should also be considering the philosophical approach or the research philosophy as already stated that you'd be using. And then formulate your aim and objectives. You then have to establish your research strategy, determine your research approach, decide on your research method, decide your appropriate data collection methods, and then finally produce a research project plan before you actually go on to conduct the research and gather the data. Then you do the analysis of the data and evaluate the findings, and then finally do your write-up of the results. So what is a research question? According to Bailey and Morland, a research question is a way of explaining as sharply and vividly as possible to yourself exactly what you are going to research and what you wish to find out. Normally, this is supported by one or more hypotheses. So, example of a research question. What factors influence successful student projects? So that's your research question. And what are the hypotheses? A good working knowledge together with use of a project management application is essential. So you think that's a hypothesis. And you've got to show or prove this. Another one hypothesis could be keeping a very detailed journal is beneficial. And a third hypothesis could be reducing the amount of learning about new technology is beneficial. So that's an example of a research question and supporting hypothesis. I've already stated a number of research philosophies: positivism, constructivism, advocacy, and pragmatism. What are these? What is your understanding of these things? The definitions are provided, and I urge you to read. What are the research approaches that you can take? There's quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method. You would realize that mainly quantitative methods takes post-positivist approach and use research methods such as experiment or survey to collect quantitative data, that is, measurements in the form of numbers. A qualitative approach, however, takes a constructivist view, tending to use research methods such as case studies, grounded theory, ethnography, to collect qualitative data, which is what non-numeric description. A mixed methods, on the other hand, takes a pragmatic approach and can collect both quantitative and qualitative data. What research methods are available? Well, you can have experiment, you can have a survey, you can do a case study, action research, implementation research, grounded theory, narrative, ethnography. Now, if you read about these things, think about which of them will be applicable to your own final year project. Which of them, of these methods, do you think will be applicable to your own final year project? Now, an experiment will normally involve testing a hypothesis, will normally require having experimental and control groups, pre-test and post-test, and then doing statistically significant tests on the results. Some of these concepts you would have covered in your course in statistics. A survey method would normally involve collecting data from a sizable population. It is normally used to identify and generalize features or trends. You could actually do a survey of individuals, do documentation on organizations. You can carry a survey by questionnaire, interview, observation. It can also be face-to-face, or it may not be. For example, you may do a survey by, email. To do a survey, an important question that you must address is a sample size. What sample size are you doing? Are you taking? And how are you actually doing the sampling? There are important issues or questions you must address. A case study, on the other hand, would involve an in-depth analysis of one or more cases of an event or an activity, a process or an individual in its real-life context over a period of time. It has a number of challenges because it's quite difficult to control variables, and then it can be difficult to generalize. But if you, however, use historical information, then it's a case history rather than what? A case study. In action research, a researcher takes a role in the task being researched and can change or influence in some way the outcomes of the task. So, for example, if you are part of a team specifying the requirements and carrying out research on some aspects of the requirement specification being used by the team, and then modifying the requirement specification process being used in the light of feedback that you get. So that will be an action research because you are actively involved in actually doing the things and modifying them as you go along. Implementation research is a special sort of action research. So you collect the data beforehand, devise and implement a solution, collect data to show that there's some sort of improvement, consider if any other alternative designs should have been better. Yeah, so that's the way you go about that. But generalizing this can be an issue. Grounded theory is about generating of theory from data. So you're constructing theory rather than testing the theory. So there's no theory in place, but you are going to generate that theory. Grounded theory, because the theory is derived from reference to the data that you've collected on the ground. You build hypotheses from the data collected and then seek to test them out. And then sampling other groups to find out the similarities and the differences. And narrative research is about storytelling. You get people to recount their experiences of an event or series of events. The researcher, then will have to rearrange the events into a chronological sequence. There could be a three-dimensional inquiry space that's temporal, spatial, and personal social. What data collection methods are there available to you? Sampling, secondary data, that's looking at secondary documentation, survey, multiple sources, observations, questionnaires, and interviews. These are all methods you can use to collect data. Data collection can be quite expensive in terms of time and effort. So it's important that you know the data that you need to gather. Because you don't want to gather data and then realize that what you've collected is actually not so useful to you. You must also know what you do with the data once you've gathered it. And determine whether the method you are going to use for gathering this sort of data is the best technique. Is that the best way to collect the data that you need? What is sampling? Now, in many instances, it is not practical or even necessary to use the entire population of interest. So, for example, you may want to think about, you may want to do something about students' views, on teaching methods. Now, the University of Ghana has over 30,000 students. It's not practical for you to talk to every or sample each and every of these students to find out what they think. So then, you need to take a group or a sample of these students. So that's what sampling is about, taking a sample that's a subset of the people that you really need to talk to and finding out their views and making generalizations from there. Now, what about secondary data? It's something that you may often have to use. Yes, secondary data is not data that you've collected yourself, but the data has already been gathered by someone. So the information is, may be available, and and you can gain advantages to it, access to it. So it may be cheap, for you because you don't have to then go around collecting the data yourself, which can be very expensive. So it's an advantage that to use secondary data has an advantage in the sense that the data is already there. But it may have some disadvantages as well. In that the person collecting the data might have collected it for a different reason. And you don't have access to the original source. So you may not know precisely why they collected the data and why they collected it in that way. Now, observation is another method you can use to collect data. It can be expensive in terms of time taken to make your observations, because if you are going to observe people, it means you have to sit there and watch them do what they are doing. But there are some problems with it. You can't just go and sit and watch people. You've got to get their permission. There's also what is known as a Hawthorne effect. What is it? You can use observation to cross-check data obtained using other methods. So someone has gathered the data already, so you can do some observations to validate that data and make sure that, well, it appears to be generally correct. People can also use questionnaires, and they have some specific advantages. Questionnaires can be used to achieve a wide coverage. They are fast in terms of reaching a large or geographically dispersed group. They are relatively cheap to produce and administer because when you design the questionnaire, you just maybe make copies of it, and then you then distribute them to the group of people you want to administer them to. They are also standardized and ensure that identical questions are asked. Everybody answers the same questions. Additionally, they can be anonymous in that it will encourage people to give honest and full answers. They, however, do have some disadvantages. You need to design this very carefully, and you need some specialist skills for that. Their design can be time-consuming. A disadvantage to questionnaires is that the response rates can be poor. Generally, only about 10% return rate can be achieved. Of course, if you can achieve greater than that, that's great. Another disadvantage is that you cannot check or validate the results because in many instances they are anonymous and you don't know who is saying what. Also, you are only analyzing, they can have a bias in the sense that you're only analyzing the results of those who could be bothered to return the forms. And therefore, you cannot make an assumption that those responses are general of the whole group. Interviews can also be used. There are structured interviews, there are semi-structured interviews, and there are unstructured interviews. You can do an interview on a one-to-one basis, groups or focus groups. When you do data collection or the analysis of data you've collected, it can be longitudinal against cross-sectional. That's in time. Access to the data, ethics, confidentiality, and trust are issues you need to address. Who gets access to the data? What are the ethical issues? Are there any confidentiality and trust issues? Reliability of the data, validity, bias. Is it a researcher bias, respondent bias? The validity, measurement validity, internal validity, generalizations. What are these? So, in this session, what have we done? We've looked at the research design method, the research question, the philosophy, the research strategy, which includes the approach, methods, and data collection. So this brings us to the end of the session on research methods. I hope you find some of the information useful to you when you attempt to do your own final year project. Thank you.